Hello everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Digital Empathy Lounge, brought to you by Anthralytics. My name is Peter, and I'm going to be your host today. Now, if you've not come across the Digital Empathy Lounge before, this is a podcast series exploring the best or next practices in experience management. Allow me to take a moment to explain what that is about. Well, firstly, we want to hear what great experiences should look and feel like. And we're inviting experts with forward-looking ideas to talk about how to practically deliver better customer experiences or employee experiences at scale and speed. And it is intended for a senior audience in organizations that have an interest in deploying the next wave of customer experience, but it's available to everybody. Now, today I'm in conversation with Jonathan Hawkins, who is the CEO and a co-founder of Anthralytics. Hello, Jonathan.
Morning, Peter. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Good.
Now, Jonathan, before we begin, can you tell us a little bit about your background prior to Anthralytics?
Sure. So I'd spent, I think what would be classified nowadays as about 25 years in the customer experience space. Initially, my my exposure was to solutions which provided customer experience at the point of interaction. So things like contact center solutions, how do you improve the CX at the point of interaction as a customer contacts you? And for the last 10 years, my focus has really been on the measurement and analytics of customer experience. So how do we understand the experience we're providing to a customer? What transformational program should we put in place to optimize that? And so my first exposure to that was part of the executive team at Satmetrics, who are famed for co-creating the Net Promoter Score. I think a lot of people know that as a name in the industry. And this really gave me a deep insight into how traditional CX programs operate, I think primarily, but also latterly the limitations of those programs. And we'll go on to speak about some of those later on. Now, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, we sold Satmetrics, and I then went on to found a company based on predictive CX for B2B companies. I think using a lot of the experience around limitations that I saw, I was really trying to figure out, like, how do we create an organization that takes advantage of the leading technologies and ML and AI capabilities that we have nowadays to allow companies to use operational data to understand what's optimal in terms of performance along the customer journey, and then start to predictively highlight outcomes, i.e. customer churn, customer health, and so on and so forth. Now, sort of rolling forward probably to actually the beginning of this year, as you know, Peter, I was blown away by the work that you've done on predictive behavior and analytics, and particularly the way it linked to measurable outcomes, and by which I mean, a direct linkage to financial outcomes which impact the performance of companies. And so whilst I still retain an interest in the other company, I kind of found this concept of predictive behavioral analytics and how that allows organizations to execute empathy at scale too good an opportunity to miss. And frankly, as we know, that's how Anthralytics was born. I just thought it was exactly what the market needs and what consumers want, most importantly.
Great, thank you very much, Jonathan. So, you and I have got some history together. We've talked a lot about customer experience, but I particularly was interested, as you were talking about, being one of the people behind the explosion of NPS as a measure of satisfaction. It's linked to customer experience. And you and I used to have some quite, I think, what diplomats would call robust discussions about some of the challenges it put it there. But so there has been this conversation over years about customer experience management and the link to customer satisfaction. And we've developed lots of good things as a discipline. There's been a lot of good to come out of that work. But what do you think are the big challenges for organizations who want to continue to excel in the next wave of customer experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Peter. And I think, and I think anyone who knows me relatively well probably knows what the answer to this is going to be, is that the quality of data being used by a lot of, or the vast majority of CX programs is simply not up to par. All right. And you see a lot of discussion in the industry about how do I get my executives on board? How do I create financial linkage? And there are lots of how do I questions around the, I can't get anyone to pay attention to what I'm talking about. I do a lot of work, the company doesn't invest. You see all these things. I mean, you look on LinkedIn, you look at the content that's written. And actually, when you crystallize this down to what is the issue is data. And ultimately, the reason I say that is we think about how typical CX programs are built. And they're built around the concept of surveying, or indeed in a contact center with speech analytics, they're built around, right, anyone who contacts us. Now, think about this in the scale of a large B2C organization. It's typically going to be probably south of 5% of customers who will periodically contact you or respond to a survey. So, there's a very fine colleague of mine who always says, look, companies actually have less than 1% of the data they need to make a viable decision. And so I think those organizations who start thinking about, right, how do I address the data challenge, and how do I start implementing analytics, not reports, which is, there's big confusion on that as well. People call reporting analytics, particularly out of survey platforms. How do I start incorporating all of the data around my customers in a way that allows me to start being forward-looking rather than lagging? So you look at all of the measures, whether it be NPS, customer effort, CSAT, pick your poison on that front. They're all lagging indicators. And we've got the technology and the thinking nowadays to enable us to start looking through the windshield, not the rearview mirror. And so, so you have this data problem. You also have the problem, I think, that most organizations think that operational experience is the golden arrow, if you like. This is going to solve all the problems. And I think undoubtedly, of course, people need to focus on operational efficiency. But the reality is that in most commoditized marketplaces, operational efficiency is pretty much at a par, right? If I go to any mobile provider in the UK, right, I'm going to get pretty much the same level of service. And so it becomes a hygiene factor in the eye of the consumer. Right, it doesn't win you any browser points. Now, conversely, if it goes wrong, you're going to lose, obviously, so that you need to maintain operational efficiency. But it's not going to help you win as we move into the future. So I think it's this combination of improved data sets, start thinking about analytics, not reports, start thinking about direct linkage to financial outcomes, which you can only do with good quality data. And this is why, no executive will look at, a 5% response rate once a year on a survey and say, well, this is great, I'm now going to bet the farm on a strategic transformation. And really start thinking about, how do I compete on the experience? And what does that mean? And how do I use data to start competing on experience? Not just how do I sit in a room and, with a bunch of post-it notes, trying to think what a customer is going to do. So I have a fairly brutal view, as you can tell, on, legacy CX programs. And I think a lot of the problems require some radical changes in thinking, which, I hope, we in our own way go a small way to solve.
Thank you, Jonathan. So let me just see if I've heard you correctly. So, yeah, I absolutely get the point about data. Lots of organizations have lots of data, but is it necessarily the right data fit for purpose for what they're trying to achieve? Also, I think, you and I both have come across this a lot. A number of organizations are probably asking the right question in the wrong way or the wrong question in the right way. And when you really want to know what somebody feels, the worst thing you could do is ask them directly, how do they feel, particularly if you're only sampling. I also do like the point that you raised about operational efficiency. As you said, that's just a given now. We expect organizations we deal with to do a good job. That's what we pay them to do. It isn't a differentiator anymore. And I think that also there may be a misunderstanding, as some people have looked at satisfaction and now they're looking at things like ease or friction within process, thinking that that's the only determinant either, that if we just get rid of all of the challenges to doing something, that will be naturally better. Of course, everybody is racing to the same point. So I think we were at a point a year or so ago when you and I were talking about this, of a world which was already in a lot of transformation, that was thinking hard about, well, what is the next step? Looking at the data, looking at the tools they had to analyze their data. And then we had the dash to digital. So we recognized right at the outset of the formation of Anthralytics that a lot of organizations were either accelerating existing plans to digital delivery or were forced to do it as a result of circumstances beyond their control, like the pandemic. But that has presented some challenges for organizations, not least of which, for example, how to make a digital experience feel empathetic. Now, you and I have used the term digital empathy, but what I'd like to ask you is, what do you mean when you use that term, digital empathy?
Yeah, so I think it's this is a broad question, right? Because I think as we all know, we've been through, as a as a world, significant challenges that none of us could have predicted in any way, shape, or form. Um, but I think the change was starting prior to the pandemic, and so you've seen an awful lot of socio-political events which were driving changes in the way people were thinking. The world became very divisive politically. There were a lot of areas, and I cite things such as the BLM movement, all of these things which indicated significant change which had to take place in the world, and absolutely rightly so. And I think what that started to do was shift people's thinking. And the way it started to shift people's thinking was, look, I don't want to do business, or one of the areas that I looked at was, I don't want to do business with companies who are purely at service of the shareholder. And I think, as part of all these changes, people started looking at organizations saying, look, I want to do business with companies who do the right thing, and do the right thing for the environment, and do the right thing for diversity. But also, people also understand the economic realities. This is not a world, I don't think, where consumers are looking at organizations saying, well, you shouldn't make money, you should just do the right thing. I think consumers are looking at it in terms of organizations who do the right thing for their ecosystem of stakeholders. And by that ecosystem, I mean the local communities in which they live, the employees, the customers, and of course the shareholders, because without being a profitable company, they're not going to be around. And I think people understand that. But I now think that there is a far more mature view that consumers have around the types of organizations that they want to do business with. And more than that, consumers want organizations to understand them as individuals. And look, I think it's a given and an unarguable fact that emotion plays a part in every decision. Not to say that every decision is emotional, but it plays a part in every decision. And so as part of that, consumers expect organizations to understand where they are at any given time. So look, if I receive a marketing message from somebody and I've just had a bad experience and I'm angry, then it's actually just going to make me more angry. If I'm ambivalent, I'm probably never going to open that marketing message. And actually, if I've been delighted, then the odds are I'm going to be far more receptive to that offer. So I think people are now expecting not to be interrupted, right? And sending me a sales message when I'm angry is interrupting me and just going to send me off the edge of a cliff, right? But they expect organizations to know where they are emotionally at any given time and respond appropriately with the right message to the right person at the right time. So I think you have this sort of understanding that I want personalization, but I don't think of personalization as, oh, Jonathan bought this product and people like you bought this product. That's, again, it's kind of table stakes nowadays. And also operational efficiency, as we discussed, does not win you any brownie points, okay? Because, and I refer specifically to sort of highly commoditized B2C primarily. I mean, you could argue B2B the same, but highly commoditized marketplaces, the fact that you answer my call in 2 rings rather than 3 does not mean that it's going to drive loyalty. And then you've seen a lot of research come out over the last sort of 12, 18 months, particularly around what is driving loyalty in consumers. And as a result of all the things I've talked about, they place empathy right at the top of the list. I mean, by a huge margin. You're talking sort of 85 to 90% of consumers say empathy is top of the list in terms of loyalty. So then the question becomes, right, how do I, as an organization, in a world where I've invested heavily in digital and unwittingly actually have engineered myself out of the relationship with the customer with a drive to self-serve, how do I start making that feel more human? How do I understand how Peter is feeling today in order to interact with Peter in a way that is empathetic? And there's a number of ways you can think about that. Okay, you can look at the marketing, right? how do I put Peter in a cohort of people who are feeling, or we anticipate are feeling in a similar way to Peter is, and make sure that the messaging we're putting is relevant to the way that they're feeling. So as we said, look, sell to people who are receptive, right? Build loyalty in those people who are ambivalent, right? Tell the people who are angry that you know you did wrong and what you're going to do to fix it. So, understanding people's emotion on a day-to-day basis is, of course, not the entire answer. There's a whole infrastructure that needs to go around this, obviously. But without that understanding, organizations cannot be empathetic. The definition of empathy is being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. If I don't understand how you feel, how on earth can I do that? And so what we seek to do is give organizations a way to understand the emotional state of every customer every day. And now, if we understand that, we also understand that emotions lead to particular behavioral outcomes. And so now we understand the emotion, we can now link that to what likely behavior is Peter going to take next. And now we understand that, it's very, very simple to link that directly through to financial outcomes. So is Peter likely to buy more, buy less, churn, in a very simplistic example? And so by digital empathy, what I mean is having the ability to understand the emotional state of every customer every day, understand what their next likely behavior is going to be, and respond empathetically with the right message to the right person at the right time, and do that at scale. And today, just going back to the point about data, people can't do that. They're trying to do this on a very, very small subsection of customers, and worse, just because I'm happy today doesn't mean I'm going to be happy in 3 weeks' time if I've had no other interaction. Okay, so emotions change, and this is why it's critical that you have a process, which of course, with the improvements in technology, ML, right, you can now do this. I can now very accurately predict your likely emotional state, your next likely behavior, and allow truly empathetic programs to be put into the organization as part of the natural course of business. So it's a very long-winded answer there, Peter. It's something I feel very passionate about.
No, it's fine. Thank you very much. So let me just see, I'll press a little bit about that if you wouldn't mind. So what I'm hearing is, obviously lots of organizations are using digital channel. That's great for outreach to millions of people in real time, actually, in many cases. But personalization is more than putting my name at the top of the email, or simply just saying, well, people like you based upon very static criteria. Now, no doubt things like affordability are an issue, but people's emotional state absolutely does determine what they go on to do and how we make decisions. So if we can do that for everybody in a customer database, rather than just the people we have in a direct human-to-human conversation, it gives us potentially an enormous competitive advantage, because what we can actually do is start to treat people the way that they want to be treated. And the way they echo that back is, well, not only are you listening because they're aware of things like we are doing voice of customer surveys, but actually now you're beginning to hear me and you're beginning to understand me as a human being. And I think you put that very nicely when you said, empathy is being able to put yourself in the shoes of another person, and able to understand what they're feeling and why, and make an appropriate action to that. And as you say, do that at the speed and scale, and also the adaptability that digital gives us to deliver a better, more humane experience. What I sometimes call delivering compassion with the competence. So do the good job, but do it in a humane way.
Anyway, and I can just dive in there, Peter, as well. I'm also, and I think, again, anyone who knows me knows that I'm, very, very practical in terms of business. Let's not underestimate the return on investment of deploying this type of program within your organization. As we've seen in a major B2C organization, returns of 17% when A/B testing marketing campaigns against, people who aren't doing this, just a standard marketing campaign. Now you start predicting emotion and behavior. You then start running empathetic campaigns into those people. An improvement of 17%, reductions in churn of 11%. These are significant returns on investment when organizations are at scale with multi-million customers. And so, there is, whilst I mean, the thing I like about this is it falls into both camps. It's a great way of doing business, right? And it's the right way to do business. But more than that, and you are, well, going back to my earlier comments, you are looking after the ecosystem of employees and consumers, but also you're looking after your shareholders as well, and making that direct linkage. The common CX cry of, how do I provide financial linkage? Well, this is how you do it, right? Because the returns are significant as well. So yeah, everybody wins, I think, is my message.
Thank you, Jonathan. And it's a good point. And it does reflect, as you say, the earlier one. Not only do we need to be customer centric, but now we also need to be stakeholder inclusive, and that it is an ecosystem where everybody wins. The customer wins, we as an organization win, but us shareholders win, society wins, even government wins. And with that, I'm just going to say thank you very much, Jonathan. It's really great to get you onto the podcast.
Pleasure.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Digital Empathy Lounge. Now, I hope you've enjoyed it, and please join us for other episodes. You can find out how in the comments below. And if you would like to be a guest on the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. And you can find a link on how to contact me also in the comments. But with that, all that remains for me to do is to say thank you and goodbye for now. Thank you.